Hello, Brick Sculptors, and welcome back to Brick Sculpt. This is Chris, and today I'm going to give you guys the LDU video that you asked for. Now, a few days ago, I put out a video talking about LDU, or Lego Draw Units, and I gave this example here as my final example of small increments that you can make in Lego. And these are two LDUs apart in each one, and of course, by definition, the LDU means the smallest possible interval. So 2 LDU is obviously not the smallest. And yes, you guys were right for telling me why the heck would you stop there. Now, my rationale was two things. Number one, I didn't own the parts to make 1 LDU intervals, at least on this scale, although I really did. We'll talk about that in a second. And number two, for most people, and I still hold this to be the truth, for most people, myself included, this is probably the smallest interval you're ever going to need in Lego. But, to be fair to you guys, it doesn't make sense to define an LDU without showing a true LDU. Now, I mentioned in the other video, the way that we're going to get to 1 LDU is by using the minifig neck bracket. And I should have been more specific. I didn't realize that it's only the older ones. The older ones have a 3 LDU thickness on this portion here, where the newer ones are actually 4 LDUs. They're actually the same as a bracket thickness. So they have to be the old ones, but they are pretty easy to source. In fact, I have several of them on order for future videos. And in trying to make this video, I only came up with 2, a gray one and a red one. So obviously I couldn't do 20 LDU steps because you're going to need these for every other step to make this a full 20 LDUs spread out in one line. But somebody mentioned in the comments that there's another piece I could use. And that is the goblet. Well, the goblet is actually the same height as 5 plates. But if you combine it with a stud inside so you can connect on it, it leaves a tiny little gap in between the top of the goblet and the bottom of the stud. And that, combined with the lip of the stud, makes a 3 LDU gap. So this gave me the idea of, well, yeah, I could use that to make my steps. And let me show you how that works. So here on this piece, I've got laid out a few jumper plates. Now, if you haven't watched the first video, I highly recommend watching it. I'll have it linked here as well at the end of the video. It's going to give a lot more insight into how I do this technique. This is kind of a follow-up video, but you can watch it on its own. It will still make sense. The way you do 1 LDU steps is you have to use the jumper plate. That gives you quarter steps on either side of a brick, then your neck brackets, and then 3 LDU plus 8 LDU equals 11 LDU. You have a 10 LDU spacing on the jumper, which gives you just enough of a hangover for 1 LDU. And actually, I found it really interesting too. If you take another plate and put it up to it, I got asked this a lot in the comments, but the little ridge that they put at the bottom so that you can get your fingernail under it is exactly 1 LDU, or at least I think it's exact. It definitely fits really nicely. So that is the most common way of achieving 1 LDU. But with the goblet, you can do another method that I almost like better. So if you take a standard snot piece, put it on jumpers back here, you do have to set this back a 2x2 plate to get it to the proper distance because the goblets are so tall. Take a couple of goblets. This is best with 4, but to save pieces, I'm just going to do it with 2. Goblets with studs, with a tile on the end. Put it on there, and this measures exactly the same as our 1 LDU. Pretty cool. Now, what are the pluses and minuses here? Obviously, the neck bracket is a lot smaller, so if you have to work in a tighter space, this is going to work better. But the neck bracket gives a funky connection. Much like the headlight brick, it leaves a space at the bottom. So unless you're using a 1x2 tile that you can slide up and down, it's going to have this goofy space, which may be a problem for you. On the contrary, the goblet, you can have 4 connection points, and they're perfectly in system with normal snot pieces. They're just like extra long 1x1s. Now the downside is you have to set it back quite a ways to get the appropriate LDU out of it. So if you don't have this room to work with behind the scenes, this could be a problem. But because I don't have the neck brackets, I'm going to do this technique in all 20 steps using goblets. Before I do that, I'm going to show you the pieces I'm going to use for this technique. And unlike the last video where everything was white, that was a terrible decision. I'm sorry for that. It's really hard to see what pieces are what when everything's white. I'm going to color code this to make it easier for you. All of my tiles are going to be dark tan. I'm going to use these for my stud attachments. I'm going to connect things in the line. You can do this mostly with just 1x2 plate and tile, or with just 2x2 plate, but these work really nice and seamless, and they make it go really smooth. So you don't necessarily have to use that, but that's what I'm going to use in the video. Jumpers will be green, and they're always going to be in a pair. Just regular plate is going to be lime green. And hopefully this will help you pick the pieces out as I go so you can see the differences. 1x1 rounds are going to be dark green. Goblets will be clear. Headlight bricks, although you don't necessarily have to use these. We'll talk about this further here in the future. Headlight bricks will be white. Brackets, dark blue. And 2x2 snot pieces will be tan. With these pieces here, I can achieve all 20 steps of LDU in 1 brick's thickness. Let me show you how we're going to do that. So I already laid this out. And again, it's all color coordinated. So you can see jumpers here in green, just regular studs in gray. The dark gray here is just going to show the overlap. I've already got set up 1 brick thickness and 2 brick thickness. So across these 20 steps, it's actually 19. This will be number 20. I'm going to do very minute differences all the way from here to here. And so let's go ahead and show you the steps one by one of how we're going to achieve that. The first one is exactly what we did here, 1 LDU thickness. So it's basically going to be a snot piece, 2 goblets, the rounds, and the tile. And it's going to look like it just barely sticks out because it just barely sticks out. We're talking very, very small gaps here. Like I showed in the last video, these are 2 LDU gaps, and they're very small. These are going to be tiny. Step number 2 is pretty simple. Jumper plates, a bracket, and a tile. And that is 2 LDUs. Step number 3, back to the goblets, but now we're going away from the jumper. Instead, we're using a bracket, a plate, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and a tile. And that will achieve us 3 LDU. The next step can be built in 2 different ways. The way I built it was like this. I used a snot brick, 2 plates, 1 tile, and I stuck it back 1 stud from where the final LDU needs to show. Now you can also build this with headlight bricks in a more simple fashion. 2 headlight bricks and a plate. Now in this one you would want it on the front studs, not the back ones. But the reason I didn't do it like this, I actually prefer this method, is just like with the neck brackets, you have this weird gap on the bottom. And none of these other steps have that gap. So this would stick up higher than the rest of the wall. Not necessarily a problem for demonstration, but just keep in mind there's 2 different ways you can build this step, but I like this one because it's going to be nice and clean and flush across the whole top when I'm done. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 LDUs. We're at half of a plate thickness. The next one, we're going to go back to jumpers, and then a bracket, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and a tile. And that's going to achieve us 5 LDU. The increments are so small, they barely look like they're changing. The next step, 2 jumpers, snot brick, 1 plate, 1 tile. So essentially every other step on here are the steps I did in white in the previous video, and we're adding in the ones with the goblets. So as you can probably guess, the next step, we're going to go back to goblets. Here we push the studs to the back. And there's also a pattern here. It goes Jumpers, no jumper, jumper, no jumper. Just like in the front, jumper, no jumper, jumper, no jumper. And that's how you get that quarter plate offset. So here we're back to the back here. Snot brick, 2 plates, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and a tile on the front. And this is going to get us to 7 LDU. This next step, we will finally be at 1 plate thickness. So 2 studs on the front, snot brick, and a tile on the front. Now we're at the point where this is hanging over 1 plate into the dark gray section here. And you can see just how gradual that is. That's 8 steps to achieve 1 plate thickness. Pretty crazy, huh? The next step, we'll go back to goblets. Here we've got jumpers again, snot brick, plate, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and 1 tile. And now we are at 9 LDU. Back to jumpers, bracket, plate, and tile, 10 LDU. Back to the goblets, snot brick, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and a tile, 11 LDU. Bracket and a tile, 12 LDU. So now we are at a plate and a half thickness. And as we know, a bracket is a half plate and 1 plate here. So we are at plate and a half on 12 LDUs there. Back to the goblets back here. Jumpers, bracket, plate, goblets, studs, and a tile on the front for 13 LDUs. So essentially, whether you use the goblets or the neck brackets, their whole purpose is to give you an odd number. And I've kind of searched out there, there is not a lot of pieces that have an odd number of LDUs. In fact, these are the only 2 I can find, at least that have attachment points. There may be other ones that you can't attach with, but they have to be able to have studs on them. The next step here, we have jumper plates, brick, 2 plates, and a tile. And that will get us to 14 LDUs. Next step here, we go to the forward studs, bracket, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and a tile, 15 LDUs. And here we get to a 2 plate thickness, brick, plate, tile, for 16 LDUs. The next step, we go jumpers, brick, 2 plates, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and a tile for 17 LDUs. Jumpers, bracket, 2 plates, and a tile, 18 LDU. Forward studs, brick, plate, 2 goblets, 2 studs, and a tile, 19 LDUs. And then, of course, a full brick going into the dark gray, 20 LDU. And you can see that super gradual slope. Now again, for most people, these increments are going to be much smaller than you will ever need. This is going to be plenty for most applications here, what I did in white. But it's only fair. You can go to 1 LDU, so I should have shown it in the first video. But hey, it made for an awesome follow-up video. Well, hope you guys liked this. Hope you found it informative. If you have any questions about this, please leave them below. If I did anything wrong or is there anything else you need to let me know about, please let me know in the comments. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. We do more just like this in the future, and we will see you next time.